Cornelius Fudge sucks. Plain and simple, he's one of the most irritating characters in the series, and the film showed this a bit, but not enough to fully understand how awful he is. So I wanted to take a moment to go over his life and explain his arc in the books, so we can really see why he's so disliked by so many Harry Potter fans, and even disliked by so many Harry Potter characters. Before we start, I just wanted to say that I'm going to stop using the YouTube community tab as much as I have been, and start using other platforms more so that the Movie Flame brand extends past just YouTube, just in case the worst happened and I lost the channel or something. So make sure you follow me on Twitter, which is the most important, because that will sort of replace the YouTube community tab. I'll be posting the most updates there, and that's linked down below. You can also follow us on Facebook, and if you want, you can follow my personal Instagram as well, which is full of cute dogs, behind the scenes Movie Flame stuff, and just some fun posts. Both of those are linked down below as well. Now, let's get started. Cornelius Fudge was born in Britain, and he attended Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Judging by his early success in the ministry, Fudge did well in school, and most likely got good marks on his OWLs and NEWTs. He ended up getting a job in the ministry, and he worked his way up to junior minister in the Department of Magical Catastrophes. During his time in the ministry, Fudge became known for wearing a lime green bowler hat that always made him stick out, as well as wearing a pinstripe suit. Fudge's first big task was responding to a call about a wizard murdering many muggles and a fellow wizard. Fudge was one of the first on the scene, and it was a moment that he said he would never forget. There was a crater in the middle of the street so deep it cracked the sewer below, and bodies were everywhere. Fudge had quite a job of cleaning this up, as muggles were screaming and running frantic. There was a single finger and blood-stained robes, and it seemed as though that was all that was left of the fellow wizard named Peter Pettigrew, who had been killed, and Sirius Black, the supposed murderer, stood there laughing. Fudge wiped the memory of all the muggles that witnessed this, covered up the deaths of those muggles that had been in the crossfire, giving their deaths a spin that was believable to muggles, and he watched as Black was carried away by 20 members of the magical law enforcement squad. This incident scarred Fudge so badly that he said he would never forget it, and even years later, he still had nightmares about it. After many years of working in the ministry, Fudge's name was in the running for the next Minister of Magic when Millicent Bagnold announced her retirement. Fudge was not the first choice, however, as Albus Dumbledore was the #1 most desired in pretty much the entire Wizarding World's eyes, but Dumbledore refused, not trusting himself with that much power. Barty Crouch was said to be the next minister, but the scandal with him sending his son to Azkaban for being a Death Eater ruined any shot he had, so Fudge, not the first choice, not the second choice, but the third choice, took office. Fudge, however, never forgot how much popular support Dumbledore had received, nor did he forget how admired Crouch still was in the ministry, and this made the already insecure Fudge even more insecure about holding the top job. And looking deeper, this most likely made him want to cling onto the job even more, knowing that he didn't totally deserve it, and this would of course be reflected in his actions later on down the road. To protect his job, his first act as minister was to demote Crouch to the head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, ensuring that he was out of the way. Though he could get rid of Crouch, Fudge knew he could not do the same with Dumbledore, and he pretty much allowed Dumbledore to do whatever he wanted at Hogwarts. This was set in stone even more when Fudge found himself writing to Dumbledore asking for advice pretty much every morning, and Dumbledore kindly answered every one of his letters with advice. Fudge showed that he was not a good leader whatsoever from the very start of his career, the biggest example being the fact that he awarded himself Order of Merlin First Class. This caused a great deal of muttering in the wizarding community, as most considered his career less than distinguished. Not only was this selfish and big-headed, but Fudge single-handedly subverted the worth of this prestigious award that was meant to be given for acts of outstanding bravery or distinction, neither of which Fudge showed in the slightest. When word got to Fudge that multiple attacks had taken place at Hogwarts due to what looked like the Chamber of Secrets being open, Fudge felt a lot of pressure to act, especially when the school governors got in touch, and he acted by jumping to the conclusion that Rubeus Hagrid was the one behind the attacks, as he had been found guilty of this 50 years ago. Fudge journeyed to Hogwarts to arrest Hagrid, but this was interrupted when Lucius Malfoy showed up. Lucius told Dumbledore that the school governors wanted him to resign, and Fudge got very flustered, his upper lip even sweating, and to Fudge's horror, Dumbledore agreed to step down. Fudge left with Hagrid, and they made a trip to Azkaban prison where Fudge dropped Hagrid off. Eventually it became clear that Fudge had stupidly arrested the wrong man when the attacks continued. After the real person responsible was found and destroyed by Harry Potter, Fudge released the innocent Hagrid. The following summer, Fudge visited Azkaban to check up on things, and while there, he was reunited with the man he had arrested many years ago and the man who still gave him nightmares. But to his great shock, Sirius Black was unaffected by the Dementors the way everyone else was. It was unnerving to Fudge when Black asked quite normally, almost as if he were bored, if Fudge had finished with the newspaper he was reading. A little while after Fudge left, Black became the first ever known person to break out of Azkaban. There was one person who escaped before him that no one knew about. This breakout became the hardest thing Fudge had to face as minister so far. After seeing what he thought Black was capable of 12 years before this, Fudge felt he had to tell the Muggle Prime Minister about the crisis, but this decision was highly criticized by the International Federation of Warlocks as well as the public, who felt getting the Muggles involved was not necessary. Thinking that Black was an accomplice to Lord Voldemort and was the one who sold the Potters out the night they were killed, Fudge thought that Black would try to finish the job and kill Harry, and this made Fudge very worried. Fudge decided to keep this fact hushed up, however, as he didn't want anyone knowing the danger the famous boy who lived was in, because that would be bad press. When he got word of Harry leaving his aunt and uncle's house after magically blowing up his aunt, Fudge took it upon himself to meet Harry at the Leaky Cauldron when he got off the night bus, and Fudge, so happy to see that Harry was alright, waived his illegal use of magic outside of school, and set him up to stay at the Leaky Cauldron for the next 3 weeks before he headed back to Hogwarts. Fudge then left, and he purposefully did not tell Harry about the danger everyone thought he was in with Black on the loose. Arthur Weasley fought Fudge on this, however, and they had several conversations that ended in arguments, Arthur wanting to tell Harry the truth, but Fudge made Arthur give him his word that he would not tell Harry. Ultimately, Harry found out that Sirius Black was after him, but knew nothing else after he overheard Arthur and Molly Weasley arguing about it, making it so Arthur technically kept his word to Fudge because he did not tell Harry, Harry overheard him. In the film, however, he did tell him directly, but this video is based on the books, not the movies. Fudge had yet another idiotic idea when he decided to post Dementors at Hogwarts to look for Sirius Black, but Dumbledore straight up rejected this, saying that no Dementors were allowed in his school. The two came to an agreement, however, that the Dementors would be posted around the school grounds instead of inside of them, something that still irritated Dumbledore, but he agreed. However, the Dementors ended up getting on the grounds anyway during a Quidditch match, and Dumbledore just barely saved Harry, who fell off his broomstick because of the Dementors, something that made Dumbledore beyond furious at Fudge. Fudge dealt with a lot of bad press, as by winter, he had not even come close to catching Black. One day, Fudge went to Hogsmeade to check on the Dementors station there, and he decided to get a drink with McGonagall, Flitwick, and Hagrid at the Three Broomsticks, and later he invited Madame Rosmerta to join them as well. During their time there, Fudge told Rosmerta everything about Black that was hushed up, how he was friends with James in school, how he had supposedly betrayed James, giving him up to Voldemort, and being the cause of his best friend's death, and Fudge explained the incident that got Black locked up 12 years before this. Fudge was stupid as ever here, talking about such sensitive information in public, when he himself was the one who wanted to keep it hushed up, and in his stupidity, Harry overheard and discovered the truth from the very man that was hiding it from him. Fudge returned to Hogwarts at the end of term to oversee the execution of a hippogriff named Buckbeak after he had gone after a student. Before the execution, however, Buckbeak was freed, much to Fudge's confusion, and the execution did not take place. While Fudge was at Hogwarts, Sirius Black was found by the Dementors and was knocked out, and in the process, Harry and Hermione passed out as well. Fudge praised Snape for bringing the kids to the hospital wing, and he said he would try to get him an Order of Merlin 1st or 2nd class for bringing Black up to the castle as well. When Fudge saw that Harry was awake, Harry frantically told Fudge that Black was innocent. Fudge dismissed this, however, and said that Harry was confused. Madame Pomfrey then kicked Fudge and Snape out as they were upsetting her patients. Fudge had ordered the Dementors to come to the castle to perform the Dementor's kiss on Black, sucking his soul out. But before this could take place, once again, much to Fudge's confusion, Black had been freed just as Buckbeak had been. Fudge was very stressed out, thinking about the bad press this would bring, having had Black and letting him slip through his fingers. To make things worse, he had Snape shouting at him, saying that Harry had something to do with the escape, but Fudge, not knowing that Harry and Hermione had a time turner, said that Snape was talking madness, as the kids had not left the locked hospital wing since they left them. Fudge was shocked at Snape's behavior, and any praise he had given him for rescuing the kids and getting Sirius vanished, and as did his Order of Merlin. When a furious Snape stormed off, Fudge said that he seemed quite unbalanced and warned Dumbledore to watch out for him. When Fudge found out that Harry had almost gotten the Dementor's kiss, he finally came to the conclusion that Dumbledore was right, and he removed the Dementors from Hogwarts. Fudge became very busy the following summer, as he had to organize two gigantic events, the Quidditch World Cup and the Triwizard Tournament. Part of his task was to talk to the Muggle Prime Minister to warn him that dragons were being brought into the country, and that there would be a huge number of wizards coming from all over the world for the Quidditch World Cup. Fudge had his own box for the match, and when he got there, he was delighted to see Harry, who he greeted like an old friend. He then tried to introduce Harry to the Bulgarian minister, but he had trouble, as he wasn't great with translating. Fudge was also excited to see the Malfoy family, who he had invited to the box personally after Lucius gave a considerable donation to St. Mungo's Hospital. During the match, Fudge was outraged to find out that the Bulgarian Minister of Magic could speak English, saying that he had let him mime everything to him all day, which the Bulgarian minister said was funny. Fudge's worst nightmare came true when Death Eaters attacked after the match, and it led to Muggles being tormented, the Dark Mark being cast in the sky, and more bad press than he had ever received in his career, especially because they didn't catch a single culprit. He and everyone else that worked in the ministry had to work overtime to resolve this problem and to ensure the community that everything was safe. Fudge oversaw much of the Triwizard Tournament that term at Hogwarts, and for the most part, the first 2 tasks were a great success. When Fudge got word that Barty Crouch had showed up at Hogwarts, seemed to be crazy, had supposedly attacked one of the champions, and then disappeared, Fudge knew he had to step in and he arrived at Hogwarts. Here, he had a heated discussion with Dumbledore in his office. Dumbledore brought up Bertha Jorkins, a ministry employee who had gone missing the following summer, and Dumbledore said that her disappearance had to be connected to what just happened to Barty, but Fudge stupidly pushed this idea aside and said that Bertha was just an airhead who had wandered off somewhere, though the fact that she had been missing for almost a year now discredited Fudge's statement greatly. When Moody, who was also in the room, asked Fudge what he thought happened to Crouch, Fudge said that he saw 2 possibilities. Either Crouch had finally cracked, which Fudge unfairly said was more than likely due to his personal history with his son and wife, and more recently his house elf, sort of a low blow that clearly showed Fudge's jealousy of Crouch. Or a second theory, which Fudge presented in an embarrassed tone, saying that because Crouch passed the Beauxbaton carriage, Fudge jumped to the conclusion that a limp Maxime was responsible due to her being a half-giant, something that in the wizarding world is an extremely racist thing to say. Dumbledore shot him down, saying that he trusted Maxime, and when Harry entered the room after eavesdropping, Fudge greeted him warmly, but then was irritated with Harry when Harry said it could not have been Madame Maxime. Fudge took Crouch's place as the judge for the final task in the Triwizard Tournament, and before the task, he was forced to sit next to Madame Maxime, and he very ignorantly looked turned off by her, and he sat there, not talking to anyone, looking very stern. During the 3rd task, Harry and Cedric returned, but Fudge was one of the first to realize that Cedric was dead. Fudge tried to calm the situation by idiotically saying that he just had to go to the hospital wing, and the situation got much worse when Cedric's father saw his lifeless son. Thanks to Dumbledore, they found out the culprit of this was Barty Crouch Jr., and according to both Harry and Barty Jr., they discovered that Voldemort had returned to a full body once again. After being told that they had caught the Death Eater responsible for everything, Fudge felt that his personal safety was in question, and he insisted on summoning a Dementor to accompany him to the castle, despite McGonagall telling him over and over again that Dumbledore would not allow it. Fudge being Fudge of course did it anyway, and when he brought the Dementor into the office with Barty Jr., the Dementor swooped down and gave Barty the Dementor's kiss, removing his soul and making him no different than a zombie. The conversation that followed this is long, but is perhaps the most significant moment of Fudge's character development, as it shows the true side of Fudge for the first time, and not the side that he shows to the public. As they made their way to the hospital wing, McGonagall was furious, and she screamed at Fudge for letting this happen, but Fudge fought back saying that he was the minister, and if he wanted protection, he could have it. He then said that Barty Jr. was no loss, but Dumbledore cut in, saying that he could no longer testify, and could not give evidence on the people that he had killed. Fudge then said that he didn't need to testify as he was a raving lunatic, and he laughed, saying that the man thought he was taking orders from you-know-who. When Dumbledore said he was acting on Voldemort's orders, and now he couldn't testify to say that Voldemort really had returned, Fudge became dazed and stuttered, saying that that was preposterous. When Dumbledore explained more, Fudge began to laugh, saying that Dumbledore couldn't possibly take the word of a raving lunatic. Dumbledore then told Fudge how Harry had seen Voldemort return for himself, but Fudge once again smiled, and after reading many of the articles that Rita Skeeter had written about Harry that year, most of which were slander, he asked Dumbledore doubtingly if they could take Harry's words as truth. Fudge then called Dumbledore out, saying right in front of Harry that Dumbledore had been keeping certain things about Harry a secret, like him being a Parselmouth, or his scar hurting, or the fact that he was having weird nightmares, and Fudge said that Harry was not right and was hallucinating. Harry then became angry and said that he saw Voldemort come back, and he began to name the Death Eaters that were there that night, listing Lucius Malfoy, McNair, Avery, Knott, Crabbe, and Goyle. But Fudge replied saying that Harry was merely repeating the names of those that had been cleared 13 years before this. Fudge then brought up Harry's supposed crackpot story last year when he claimed that Black was innocent and said that Harry's tails were getting taller and Dumbledore was swallowing them up. Fudge then showed his racism and ignorance even more when he said that Harry was untrustworthy solely because he could speak to snakes. When McGonagall called Fudge a fool, pointing out Cedric Diggory and Barty Crouch's death, Fudge stupidly said that he saw no evidence that they were the work of Voldemort. Fudge's face then turned purple with anger, and he said to the whole room that they were all determined to start a panic that would destabilize everything they had worked for the last 13 years. Dumbledore ignored this and told Fudge that they had to act quickly and said to remove the Dementors from Azkaban and to befriend the Giants, but Fudge once again said that that was preposterous and that he'd be kicked out of office just for suggesting it. Dumbledore then got angry for the first time and said that Fudge was blinded by his love for the power he held and that he placed too much importance on the so-called purity of blood and that Fudge failed to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. And this made Dumbledore one of the first to call Fudge out for his racist tendencies. Dumbledore then continued, telling Fudge that if he takes the steps he recommends, Fudge would be remembered as one of the bravest and greatest ministers of magic they had ever known, but that if he failed to act, history would remember him as the man who stepped aside and allowed Voldemort a second chance to destroy the world they had rebuilt. Fudge's only response, however, was calling Dumbledore insane and mad. Dumbledore responded to this, saying that if Fudge was going to shut his eyes to Voldemort being back, then they would have a parting of the ways. He told Fudge that he could do what he wants, but said that he himself was going to do what he thought was necessary. Fudge then said that he respected Dumbledore and said that he had given him free rein to do what he wished, but that if he was going against him, things would change. After Snape showed Fudge the dark mark on his arm and pointed out how dark it was, signaling Voldemort's return, Fudge merely looked at the mark on Snape's arm in disgust and said that he would be in touch with Dumbledore, and he finally walked out. Fudge being a complete idiot and being desperate to hold on to a job that he knew he technically did not deserve. He believed that Dumbledore was telling him all of this so he could swoop in and steal his job, despite the fact that Dumbledore had been offered the post of Minister of Magic 4 times and had refused it on each occasion. Over the following summer, Fudge used his influence at the Daily Prophet to create a campaign designed to slander and discredit both Dumbledore and Harry. He also stormed around the ministry, checking that nobody was having any contact with Dumbledore, and if they were, they could clear out their desks. Suspecting Arthur Weasley of being in league with Dumbledore, Fudge promoted his son Percy to junior assistant to the minister, basically using Percy to keep an eye on his father. Despite the fact that Fudge always looked to Dumbledore for advice, respected him, and appreciated everything Dumbledore had done for him, Fudge had allowed power to corrupt him, and because he had become so fond of both his job and the power that came along with it, he had convinced himself that he was the clever one, and Dumbledore was simply stirring up trouble for the sake of it. Part of Fudge's drastic change was the fact that he simply did not want to face the fact that Voldemort was really back, because it would be trouble like the ministry hadn't had to cope with in many years. It was much more comfortable to convince himself that Dumbledore was lying. Fudge became delighted when Harry was caught using magic outside of school, as it only fueled the slander he had been releasing in the Prophet. Fudge first expelled Harry without a trial, but Dumbledore got involved and made sure that Harry had a fighting chance. Angry with Dumbledore's involvement, Fudge made the simple trial of underage magic turn into a full criminal trial with all of the Wizengamot. He then took it even further when on the day of, he changed the time and location of the hearing, trying to make Harry miss it. Harry of course made it, and during the trial, Fudge tried to call Harry out again for coming up with half-assed stories, this time Harry saying that he had to use magic because there were Dementors attacking him and his cousin. Fudge got visibly angry, even slamming his fist down on the judge's bench, and toward the end of the hearing, he got into another argument with Dumbledore.
The evidence that the Dark Lord has returned is incontrovertible. He stopped back.
Fudge was again disappointed when Harry was cleared of all charges. Nevertheless, the trial still worked in Fudge's favor, as it only confirmed the articles that said that Harry was unbalanced and untrustworthy, and it made the public eat this up even more. After the trial, Fudge was met by Lucius Malfoy asking about the result, and despite the fact that weeks earlier, Harry had told him that Malfoy was a Death Eater, Fudge stupidly continued to have a friendly conversation with one of the most powerful Death Eaters. When Harry and Mr. Weasley saw the two talking, Lucius made fun of both of them, which amused Fudge a great deal. When Harry asked what Lucius was doing there, Fudge decided to take their meeting to his office where they wouldn't be disturbed. Fudge accepted more donated gold from Lucius, and Fudge was too dumb to see that he was playing right into Malfoy's hand. Wanting to infiltrate Hogwarts, Fudge changed some laws and made it so if Dumbledore could not find a teacher, he himself could choose for him, and Fudge had one of his most trusted advisors, Dolores Umbridge, take on the Defense Against the Dark Arts job, and Fudge was delighted to now have a rat inside of Dumbledore's own space. However, Fudge's main reason for sending her was because he believed Dumbledore was going to use his students to form an army and rise up to fight the Ministry and secure Dumbledore the Minister of Magic post. So by having Umbridge there, she could ensure that the students would not be trained in combat. This shows just how far gone Fudge is, partly due to power corrupting him, and partly because he is in such a state of denial that Voldemort returned, that he now believes anything that proves that fact wrong, no matter how ridiculous it is. A little bit into the term, Fudge appointed Umbridge as the first ever High Inquisitor at Hogwarts. Fudge might have had most of the wizarding community believing that Dumbledore and Harry were mad and were not to be trusted, but not everyone fell for this. After the appointment of the High Inquisitor, 2 Wizengamot elders resigned in protest, saying that this was another disgusting attempt by Fudge to discredit Dumbledore. Fudge once again showed his ignorance when there was a mass breakout from Azkaban, and he once again refused to believe it was Voldemort's doing. He told the press that it was the work of Sirius Black, and that Black was a rallying point for the former Death Eaters. Fudge, however, did see the magnitude of the situation, and he not only alerted the Muggle Prime Minister, but he also told the magical community to remain alert and cautious, and he did everything he could to recapture these escaped criminals. That being said, however, by not admitting it was Voldemort's doing, their plan for hunting the prisoners was based around Black, and not on the Dark Lord, so they were looking in the complete wrong places. Fudge allowed Umbridge to continue to make educational decrees no matter how ridiculous or unfair, and one of them was the banning of student organizations that weren't approved by Umbridge herself. Fudge became delighted when he got word that Harry Potter was caught running an illegal organization at Hogwarts, and when he went to the castle, he brought with him 2 Aurors and Percy Weasley. However, when they got there, the informant that Umbridge had promised Fudge had no recollection of any such club when asked about it in Dumbledore's office, but they then found a list with the name of the group, which read, Dumbledore's Army. To protect Harry, Dumbledore lied and said that he was plotting against Fudge and that he really was forming an army of students to overthrow him, and Fudge was absolutely ecstatic to arrest Dumbledore for this. He told Percy to get this to the Prophet so they would have time to print the story the next morning, and he ordered the 2 Aurors he had brought with him to take Dumbledore in. Dumbledore, however, did not come quietly, and he escaped before Fudge could get his hands on him. When Fudge got up, he looked at McGonagall and said that this was the end of her friend Dumbledore. As he said this, the portraits of the former headmasters hissed at him, and 1 or 2 even made rude hand gestures. With Dumbledore gone, Fudge appointed Dolores Umbridge as the new Hogwarts headmaster, giving him even more control over the school. Despite his failed attempts at finding Dumbledore, Fudge felt very confident and proud of himself having thrown Dumbledore out of his own school, and Fudge believed that he had won. He had beaten the man that everyone said was far superior to him. However, Fudge had perhaps the most embarrassing and most hated falls from power. Not only did Voldemort and a number of his Death Eaters enter the Ministry of Magic under his nose, many of whom Fudge had come to realize had finessed the heck out of him for the past year, like Lucius Malfoy, but a huge group of Aurors and Ministry workers saw Voldemort for themselves in the Ministry before he escaped. Fudge was then forced to admit that he too had seen Lord Voldemort, the man that Fudge had claimed was not back for the past year.
He's back!
Fudge was then startled as he was approached by Dumbledore, who had evaded his capture for months, and Dumbledore told him that there was a group of Death Eaters for him to arrest in the Department of Mysteries, all of whom had been bound by Dumbledore himself. Fudge idiotically looked to his Aurors and yelled at them to seize Dumbledore, but Dumbledore told Fudge that he was ready to fight his men and win again, and said in a thunderous voice that Fudge had just seen proof that Voldemort was back, and that he had been telling the truth for the past year, and Fudge called his men off, though none of them had even moved or listened to the boss that they had just realized was a complete and utter idiot. Dumbledore then made an illegal portkey for Harry to take back to school, which Fudge tried to tell him off for, but Dumbledore did not grant him the time of day, and then gave Fudge several orders, saying that he would remove Umbridge from Hogwarts. He would tell his Aurors to stop searching for Hagrid, who was also on the run, said that Hagrid would be allowed back at school, that he would be reinstated as headmaster, and finished telling Fudge that he would give him a half hour of his time that night to explain everything to him. Dumbledore did just that, and Fudge finally believed him that Voldemort was back. The following day, there was an article that announced Voldemort's return, and the first sentence of the article said that Fudge confirmed this. Fudge gave a quote for the article saying that he was wrong, and went on to say that the Dementors turned on them and now served Voldemort just as Dumbledore had predicted. The article went on to say that this statement was met with dismay and alarm because as recently as last Wednesday, the wizarding community was receiving ministry assurances that there was not truth whatsoever in the rumors that Voldemort was amongst us again. Fudge went on to face many difficult situations, and over the next month or so, he became thinner, balder, and grayer, and his face had a crumpled look. Voldemort demanded that Fudge stand aside as minister, or a mass murder of Muggles would take place, and when Fudge refused, Voldemort and his Death Eaters took a bridge down, causing a huge number of injuries and casualties. The Death Eaters ran wild, and because of this, there were too many murders to count, and on top of that, the Death Eaters even infiltrated the Muggle government, putting the Muggle junior minister under the Imperius curse. Realizing that if he didn't act soon, he might lose the post of Minister of Magic, Fudge tried to have Dumbledore set up a meeting between him and Harry, his hopes being that Harry, who is now dubbed the Chosen One, would agree to work with the Ministry and tell the public that he thought the Ministry was doing a good job. A ridiculous request after he had spent the last year writing article after article claiming that Harry was mad, dangerous, untrustworthy, and a disturbed child, and had turned the entire Wizarding world against him. Dumbledore of course refused to set this up and left Fudge high and dry just as he deserved. Not long after that, Fudge was officially sacked as Minister of Magic after 6 years in office. Fudge went to see the Muggle Prime Minister to fill him in on everything, like Voldemort returning, Sirius Black actually being innocent after he had told the Muggle Prime Minister a few years back that he was a murderer, and he informed the Muggle Prime Minister that the weird things that were happening were because of their kind. This infuriated the Muggle Prime Minister, and he told Fudge that as Minister of Magic, he had to do something, and Fudge replied saying that he could not possibly believe he was still Minister after all of this, and said that he was sacked days ago. He said in a very sad and defeated way that the whole Wizarding community had been screaming for his resignation, and he finished saying that in all his years in office, he had never known the Wizarding community to be united as they were when they called for his resignation. Fudge then introduced the Muggle Prime Minister to the man who was taking his place, Rufus Scrimgeour. Just as Dumbledore had said, because he didn't listen to him, Fudge went down in history as one of the worst ministers of magic, and he was to blame for Voldemort gaining as much strength as he did. The war might have been stopped had it not been for Fudge, and he would forever go down in history as the man who stepped aside and allowed Voldemort a second chance to destroy everything they held dear. His ignorance and his thirst to hang on to power put the entire magical and Muggle world at risk. Going through his life and his career in this video, selfishness and incompetence shines through more than anything else. He got the sacking he deserved that was so sweet to all Harry Potter characters and fans. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You can follow me on social media to see more of my personal life and see more of this little dude. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook for Movie Flame updates. And I want to give a huge shout out to all my patrons listed below. If you want to be featured in the next video, plus get a bunch of other rewards, become a patron today. Again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you press that like button and subscribe, and look out for more great videos on the way.